Good morning on this last Wednesday of April. Here's some Wednesday words of wisdom on the World Wide Web that come from Psalm 119:11 that says, I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. Hiding God's word in our heart. It'd be easy to think that that simply means that we want to remember his word, so we hide it in our heart. But it means a lot more than that. One of the things that it means is that we have to allow God's word to change us. Okay, God's word is intended to change our lives so that we conform to what God desires. It's not about us changing God's word to conform to us, but rather our lives being changed to conform to God's word and his truth. And so when we hide his word in our heart, that really means that we're taking his word to heart and we're allowing his word to change us rather than us trying to change his word. And that's why the verse goes on to say, I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. Because we want God's word to change us so that we live lives that honor God. And we see the truth of that in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12, where speaking of how God's word can penetrate to the depths of our lives and change us, it says this, for God's word is living and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joint and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. So God's word is able to penetrate to the deepest part of our existence, to the very core of our being, and it judges the thoughts and attitudes of our heart. In other words, we look at God's word and we read what it says. That's the standard for our lives that God has given us. Then the question is, are our lives, the way we're living, are those in accordance with God's word? And that the question will be answered. And that's why it says it judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. You know, we see in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, the importance of allowing God's word to change us, because it says, be transformed by the renewing of your minds. So the way that our minds are impacted is when we receive information into our minds and we process it and we take it to heart and allow it to change us. So that's the way it is with God's word. We take in his word, we process it in our minds, we think about it, we apply it, we hide it in our heart, and then we live it out so that his word does indeed change our thinking, changes our priorities, changes our attitude, changes the way that we respond to things. So it's important for us as God's people to remember that we are to hide his word in our heart and take it for what it is. In other words, we have to receive God's word as his truth to us that is life-changing. We cannot water it down. We cannot tweak it to meet our needs or whatever's convenient in our lives. You know, I was reminded of that through a cute little story recently, but it really kind of reminded me of the spiritual principle we're talking about today. It's about a businessman who was interviewing applicants for a very high-level managerial position. And so he decided to make the process very simple to help him find the most suitable candidate. He simply asked each applicant this question: what is 2 plus 2? Well, the first applicant was a journalist, and he answered the question by saying 2 plus 2 is 22. The second applicant was a social worker who answered the question by saying, I don't know what the answer is, but I sure am glad we had the opportunity to talk about it. The third applicant was an engineer, and upon being asked the question, what is 2 plus 2, he pulled out his slide rule and said the answer is somewhere between 3.999 and 4.001. Well, the next applicant was an attorney, and when asked what is 2 plus 2, he said, well, in the case of Jenkins versus the Department of Treasury, 2 plus 2 was proven to be 4. Finally, the last applicant was an accountant. And so the businessman asked the accountant, what is 2 plus 2? And in answering the question, the accountant got up and he shut the door to the businessman's office and went over and he sat down and he said very quietly to the businessman, 2 plus 2 can be whatever you want it to be. Well, a humorous little story there, but it does remind us of the truth that we cannot be altering God's word or watering it down. We have to take it to heart. It's God speaking to us. We have to hide it in our hearts as he gives it to us right out of his holy word. We have to hide it there so that we process it, we think about it, we take it to heart, and we allow his word to change our lives. So, this is Pastor George praying that today God's Word does indeed make a great difference in your life.